The Opel Kapitän P1 was a luxury sedan produced by the German auto manufacturer Opel between August 1958 and July 1959. It was an evolution of the earlier Opel Kapitän model and a direct reflection of the 1950s optimism. With its American-inspired design, modern features and smooth performance, the Kapitän P1 symbolized a new era for post-war German models. The Kapitän P or P1 was introduced in July 1958 at a price of 10,250 Deutsche Marke. Just like with the previous generation, it also had an L model available for an extra 750 Deutsche Marke and also a 4-speed manual with overdrive for an additional 650 German marks, instead of the standard 3-speed manual the car came with, yet again also just like with its predecessor. The P1 stood out with its rounded flowing lines and wraparound panoramic windshield. This type of windshield, curved on the sides, was a big innovation at the time and gave the car a more futuristic look, improving visibility for the driver. It was one of the first German cars with this type of design, improving visibility and adding a more modern feel, coming from America. Chrome accents basically were everywhere, on the grille, bumpers, window frames and sides, highlighting its luxury status. The P1 styling brought an American flair to Europe, which was very fashionable for the time. The front featured a wide horizontal grille with a vertical chrome slats and simple circular headlights. The car's body was smooth and almost bubble-like, resembling American Chevrolets from the same period, which wasn't a coincidence. American car culture heavily influenced European designs in the late 1950s. At the back, the Kapitän P1 had small tail fins, another nod to American styling, although more restrained. Large rear lights sat at the end of the small tail fins, and the trunk was broad and deep, suitable for family use or traveling. Overall, the car was more sleek and somewhat much bigger than its predecessor, as it had a length of 4 meters and 77 centimeters, being 7 centimeters longer, having a width also a little bigger at 1 meters and 76 centimeters, being 3 centimeters wider, while being less tall at 1 meters and 50 centimeters tall, being 10 centimeters lower than its predecessor. Because of this bigger dimension the car had, the weight also was a bit higher at around 1310 kilograms, being around 60 kilograms heavier than its predecessor. The inside of the Opel Kapitän P1 was spacious and luxurious for its time. It featured bench seats, both front and rear, upholstered in a combination of vinyl and fabric. The dashboard was simple but stylish, dominated by a large speedometer and several chrome-trimmed knobs and switches. And the steering wheel was very large, thin, and featured a full horn ring, very typical of the 1950s. Some of the models already had some options like a radio, and some had some extra options like a clock, a heater, and some improved ventilation. As the ventilation was improved compared to earlier models, and there was plenty of room for 5 or even 6 passengers due to the bench seat. The overall feeling inside was bright and airy thanks to the large windows and slim roof pillars, enhancing the sense of openness. During its short production life, the P1 came with just one main engine option that was yet again a slight improvement of the last generation, which basically was like tradition during the Opel Kapitän's production, as it basically used a lot of the same engines, just slightly increased in performance. It was yet again a 2.5 liter inline 6, somewhat dating back all the way to the 1930s Opel Super 6. This time the engine had 80 horsepower, which was an increase of 5 horsepower from its predecessor, and it had 187 Nm of torque, which was an increase of 9 Nm. 0 to 100 time, it was actually quite decent at the time of 18 seconds, being 0.4 seconds quicker than its predecessor, and therefore also because of the more power the car had, it had a higher top speed, this time being 142 km an hour, which was actually only 2 km an hour higher than its predecessor, but it was actually very decent at the time. Although fuel consumption wasn't that interesting at the time, it had an average fuel consumption of around 11.5 liters per 100 kilometers with the 3-speed manual. However, the 4-speed manual with overdrive that became available actually had a much lower fuel consumption of this time only 10.2 liters per 100 kilometer. The gearboxes, as said before, were pretty much the same as in the predecessor, as the car standard came equipped with a 3-speed manual gearbox, which was column shifted. But you also had an optional 4-speed overdrive for an additional 650 German marks, although this was somewhat very rare, and this was mostly fitted in the Kapitän L or Kapitän Luxus. There were no special editions made directly by Opel, but there was, just like with the previous generation, the Opel Kapitän L, with the L standing for luxurious or luxus, meaning the car was more luxurious than a regular Kapitän, having for example the option of two-tone paint and a 4-speed manual with overdrive. And especially these cars had some unique colors which you could directly see at the time that it was a Kapitän L. For example, the colors were much more lively, and also the car had some more chrome. The Kapitän P1 had a relatively short production run, but it was quite successful, as from July 1958 to June 1959, only 11 months later, 34,842 Kapitän Ps were built. This model was discontinued after, just said before, 1 year. And the Kapitän and Kapitän L were made actually quite equally, as 17,710 units of the Kapitän itself, the normal model, were made, and a little less of the normal model, which was 17,132 of the Kapitän L were made, both in just 11 months. Though it only stayed on the market for about a year, it set the stage for the more advanced model that followed and was in line with the other models Opel had at the time, like the Opel Rekord P1, which eventually also was succeeded by the Opel Rekord P2 in 1960. The design also had some flaws, as some of the points in the design the car lacked were various problems with its panoramic design. Due to the steeply sloping roof at the rear, the panoramic rear window and somewhat narrow doors, climbing into the rear seat was uncomfortable for adults, as it was easy to hit your head on the edge of the roof on the rear side. Furthermore, another thing for the rear passengers was the view to the sides, which was actually quite restricted, and the low roof made rear visibility difficult, therefore also limiting the headroom of the rear passengers. Also on the front there were some problems, as the windshield, which was extended far around the corners, proved disadvantageous when climbing in, as it was easy to hit your knee on the lower frame while trying to get into the car. At the time, the Opel Kapitän P1 competed with mostly two competitors, both being German, being the Borgward Hansa 2400, which was actually produced quite some time, but not that much. Units were made, and this model basically was more expensive and less reliable, as these engines and cars had some reliability issues going on. And you also had the Mercedes-Benz 180 or 190, which were both basically nicknamed Panten, and these models were more luxurious but were much smaller and much more costly. And because of this, the Kapitän basically found its niche as an affordable, stylish luxury car for the growing German middle class, and therefore wasn't really that comparable to any other car in the market at the time, because it was, as said before, just had some very different optics and some very different other key features. Predecessor and successor wise, it was actually pretty straightforward, as the predecessor was the Opel Kapitän, either produced between 1953 or 1958 or 1955 to 1958. It could be the fact that some people see the facelift as a new generation, which I also included my videos with, as I think that the facelift isn't really that comparable to the first phase of this generation. And this was basically the predecessor of the car, made up until 1958. This had a more conservative design with less American influence, as for this generation you could already see some influences of America were already implemented, but for the Kapitän P you could really see that it was eventually more and more American styled. This generation eventually also received a successor, basically also being very much styled around Panoramic, but being improved, as this was the Opel Kapitän P2, produced for a longer period between 1959 and 1963, and this was introduced with even bigger fins, a more pronounced American look, and a more powerful 2.6 liter option. After almost 30 years of having the Kapitän name, eventually the engine was changed for the first time. The P2 was essentially just a direct evolution of the P1, improving some of the flaws the car had and having just a more American styling, further improving the formula the car had. Thanks for watching this video. To be able to upload more videos in the future, please consider becoming a member on my channel or sending a super thanks on this video. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe for more. Don't forget to check out this playlist with many interesting videos covering various parts of the automotive industry, and I will see you in the next video.